When do you need a will and when do you need a trust?
So,
What's the difference?
the difference between a will and a trust is very simple. They're not the same thing. A will is a document that tells us two things.
Welcome back to the show, Taylor.
Thank you.
It's always just me and Taylor, honestly.
Yes.
But he wrote a book which says, can you see it?
Why should I care? I'll be dead.
Yeah, Taylor.
Oh, yeah. I did write that book. That was a long time ago.
Why should I care? I'll be dead.
So the reason I wrote that book was because so many men mainly would come in and that's what they would say. And they were upset because their wife was dragging them in to do estate planning. Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, I won't be here, so why should I care? And that's a great question. And so I wrote a book to try to answer that question because I felt like I needed to be able to answer it for my clients. Mm-hmm. So.
But you know how there's this myth about estate planning where they say that, oh, I should only think about my estate planning or after death wishes for whenever I am close to death or when I'm old or when I have money actually to, set aside for my family or for whoever I want to be as beneficiaries of my estate. But how do I explain to people, or how do you explain to people why they need estate planning regardless of wherever they are in life or what age they are?
So one of the parts I bring up in the book is to explain, and it comes from Stephen R. Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. And he says, begin with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. And I realized that people who understood what they wanted very clearly at the end of life had a far better life in prioritizing what they were supposed to be doing. And mainly, this is why I think that is. Your brain has a limited capacity of what it can actually do. Okay, there's so much information at every moment that's coming in. If you don't believe this, just close your eyes and try to remember everything in this room or the room you're sitting in. And you'll realize how little you actually remember, even though everything came into your sensory input that you had. Your brain filters out almost everything. Well, unless you clearly outline your end-of-life plan, it is very difficult for your brain every day to understand what it's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. So estate planning essentially for you at the very beginning is to help prioritize what's important in your life. Once you understand that, then you clearly understand what you should be doing, or at least your brain or subconscious now knows. And so it will prioritize things, and so it makes things a lot easier for people once it's completed. So that was my first thing that I tried to explain people.
Okay. Give me a real life scenario. Say someone passes away without a will or without anything set up. They have a minor child. They have a sibling who has special care needs. They have they passed away before their parents, and their parents have been dependent on him or her.
Yeah, so another thing I talk about in the book of why you should do your estate planning is this idea of relationships. Mm-hmm. That if relationships are so unimportant to you that they do not continue after you pass away, or while you're disabled, that relationships aren't maintained, then why do you spend so much of your time trying to better them? Why do you want your kids to get along? Why do you try to make your spouse happy? Why are you doing all this effort? And so it became very clear that one of the primary driving forces of almost every human being is to maintain relationships. Mm-hmm. And what an estate plan is after you're gone, how does everything maintain itself without you? And so you're able to write down and explain what should happen. And when things are put into order like that, it makes things a lot easier.
But is estate planning all about just your assets?
Well, it's partially that. Half of it is. The other half is, who are you going to put in charge of everything? And I try to get people, one of the books that I've tried to write for a long time is The History of Estate Planning. And so I've tried to go back and to figure out how our ancient ancestors dealt with these issues. And it became obvious that one of the driving mechanisms, one of the biggest fears that people have is the death of the leader of the group or the chieftain, the father or mother of the family. Because anciently, when that happened, let's say a chief died, we go back and we can kind of dig up bones and burial sites and we can see what happens. And a lot of times there's war. Because anciently, when things weren't laid out and who controlled or accessed resources was not properly identified, properly explained, then people fought over it. And you see that play out today. You'll have brothers and sisters fighting over a farm. You have cousins fighting over, grandpa's assets that he's trying to leave, because it is ingrained in us from thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of years of watching the death of the head of whatever structure it was when they passed, how deadly that could become.
Yeah.
Now we don't kill each other, but we do kill the relationships that we've created in order to try to get those resources or get in control. So part of estate planning is who is going to be in charge? Who is the wisest person that should be doing this?
Yeah. You talked about who will be in charge and families fighting over estate or inheritance or, properties of their decedent. But I feel like it's not all about getting what. I feel like more of the estate planning, what it does is it's maintaining the relationship that you have before the person passes.
That's ideally what you can do, is try to maintain. But there's still this thing that there's going to be
This inheritance.
Well, there's an inheritance. People are going to get that, but there's going to be a change in the family structure. When no longer mom and dad are there, it becomes difficult for brothers and sisters to maintain strong relationships so they didn't have them before. Most important thing is it is to set it up so it doesn't become worse. But the loss of that structure, a new structure will be created. And if you spell out in your estate planning documents how you think it should be, it's a lot easier for everybody else to know and to do that for you. If you don't, then it's going to be, up to a judge to decide what he thinks is best. But he doesn't know your family. He doesn't know the dynamics.
Exactly.
And so it creates that huge problem where kids fight over who should be in charge and have the power to make the decisions.
How about what does estate planning do to protect your minor children?
So that's one of the other things I talk about in the book, is the idea of protecting things. So, of course, protecting assets. That's a huge part. And that's usually what you get into the discussion and why people come in. It's like, oh, we got to protect our assets. That's why we're here. But then there's the protecting of minor children or vulnerable people, people with disabilities, like children with disabilities. Like, who's going to take care of them? Who's going to be the person that's going to make sure that they have a home and make sure their assets are not stolen? It's just becoming a huge, huge issue, because never in history did we have more people that are disabled that are young than we do now. And, like in your situation, you have a sister who has CP. And so, if nothing's done to structure things for her, and heaven forbid something happened to all of her siblings, she's really in a bad position. She has no voice for herself. She will be taken advantage of. And that's terrifying to a parent when they start to realize it. And sometimes it's so terrifying it paralyzes them that they don't do their estate planning, because they fear that, oh, it's going to be uncovered that I can't take care of my kids if I pass away now, which really, no, that's not the case. Usually there's a lot of mechanisms that we can employ to make it possible. For example, we just had one where they were sure they weren't going to be able to do everything. And so they came in and, their financial advisor for years had been telling them, hey, you need to get life insurance, but they can't. There's no life insurance policy, one, that they could afford, but no one's going to insure them. So they came in and talked to us, and they're like, well, what should we do and everything? And I go, well, you have 2 healthy kids who've said they're going to take care of their sibling because they love them. I said, you get the life insurance policy on them, because really the only thing you have to fear is if your other children pass away that are going to take them. It's like you're going to leave all your assets to them to take care of them. But really the disaster is when they pass away. And they had 2 disabled children, but both of them. And it was like life-changing at that moment when they realized
They can do that.
oh, it was as simple as just understanding that little trick. So things like that can change things for people significantly when they can figure out a way to solve their problems.
You've addressed minor children. You've addressed this people with incapacity or disability or special needs. How about what does estate planning do to blended families, to same-sex spouses, to unmarried partners?
So so we have the blended families is a disaster because you have 2 different families, 2 different set of priorities. And so without addressing it, it always ends up usually in litigation, because you have children fighting against a parent, and then people are shocked to find out that even though you're the spouse, you don't necessarily inherit the property, and that shocks people that they're not getting half the house. It's going to go to the kids, not to them. And so figuring all that out and how to take care of your children and also take care of your spouse is incredibly important. And then on the flip side, when you have situations where family structures are so difficult that there's no way people are going to get along, or there's no way that people can actually function together, that's where you're going to see the other biggest benefit that you're going to get from estate planning. The blended families are by far number one also with people that have children with special needs, of who needs to do estate planning.
Say, for example, I set up my estate plan, and I have kids. I have kids, and I have a husband. How do I make sure that my property goes to? Can I just disinherit them when I want to? Because in the Philippines you can't. I don't know the disinheritance rights or laws here, but
You can disinherit anybody you want.
anybody?
Anybody. Now, there's certain protections, like a spouse gets a life estate in the home, meaning the right to live there for the rest of their life. It was the primary residence, but you don't have to leave anything to your spouse. You don't have to leave anything to a kid. You could give everything to, a mistress.
Whoever.
Yeah,
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's your property. You can do what you want. And so if you want to really blow up your legacy, you can do something like that and have your whole family hate you for the rest of existence.
Right.
But yes, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. Now, is that going to end up in litigation? Yes.
Probably.
And attorneys will get everything. So you have to be very wise about how you're doing things. But yes, there's no requirements like the Philippines, where they have what are called forced inheritance rights.
Yeah, we do.
Certain states do, but Texas does not.
That's a thing. That's why it's important to know like your country's laws, because they can set up an estate plan here, and still be void for whenever, say for example, they do their estate plan here with us Filipinos.
Yeah. So, and I got to be a little clear with something. You can disinherit anybody you want. You might have contractual rights that you still have to pay, for example, child support. You can't not pay your child support that you owe. We'll come after the people who have the right to receive the child support can file suit, but they're like a creditor.
Yeah.
They're not inheriting the property.
So how do you protect your assets from creditors?
So, when you pass away, it's required by law that your creditors get paid. Okay. So one way that you can do it is give assets when you're alive. through different structures. So it already passed outside, and most states have statute of limitations where, they can come back and get those assets. So some people, they get to a point where they're like, I have plenty of assets. So like there are trusts where you give your property basically to your kids now, but you retain the income rights to them so you can live off the income. But it's basically your kids' money now. And so if anything ever happens to you, you get sued, or when you die, creditors can't come after that. Now, most of the time when we create a living trust and when someone passes away, at least in Texas where I'm at, in 15 years, never once has a creditor gone and filed a claim in a probate and tried to bring in the trust assets. I haven't seen it yet.
Maybe they give a lot of importance to trust.
Well, yeah, if you're an attorney and you're representing a client, trusts are private, so you don't know what's in there. And they say, well, this guy died. He owes us $50,000 in credit card debt. We want to sue him. And you're like, well, no one's probated his estate. You can look online and see that. So that usually means he doesn't have anything. Mm-hmm. And let's say they came back to you, well, he has a trust. And then I have to tell them, well, we don't know what's in the trust. Maybe we know that there's a house in there. Okay, but and you might be able to surmise that you can get something out of that. But that's a lot of money that they're going to have to fork over to that attorney to get that $50,000. And most of the time they just write it off because it's just not worth their time. So a lot of times trusts can't avoid paying creditors out of the fact that it's too difficult to come after the assets.
That's why estate planning is really important. But how about for those who already have estate plans set up? How often do they need to update it? Like, what life changes do they have to have before they should consider redoing their estate plans or,
So usually my advice to people is if you've never done it, you should do it now, because you should set up some type of structure. And like I said at the very beginning, once you understand what you want to happen in the end, then everything else becomes a lot clearer. It's like, okay, it's amazing when people have an actual financial plan done and know the date that they can retire versus those who don't. It's like night and day when someone comes in here. Oh, yeah, I know. On my current plan, I can retire when I'm 57 and a half.
57 and a half.
Yeah.
Because you have a financial plan.
Because, yeah, you did your financial plan, so we know exactly when you can retire.
So you're saying regardless of your net worth, whether you're wealthy or not, you have to do your estate plan. What are the instances where you don't do it?
Well, I mean, we have I really haven't run, but of course, if someone's too elderly and they have absolutely nothing, and you still should be getting power of attorneys done. That should be your estate plan. But I've really haven't run into any situation where someone doesn't need it at all, because it's really trying to identify what happens when you're incapacitated and what happens when you pass away. And it's that clarification. Now, there's a significant difference on what you do. People,
when you have a lot.
Yeah, when someone has a lot of assets versus someone who doesn't, there's a lot more documentation that needs to be done. When you have a lot of things, there's a lot more concerns that you'll have. But there are always things that are going to come up, no matter how big or small your estate is, that you're going to have to think through and walk through. And that's one of the best things of sitting down with a professional that knows what they're doing, is they're going to be able to ask you the questions when they identify what's going to be a problem. If you get a good estate planning attorney, they know everything. There's thousands of questions that I can ask a client. I've seen some estate planning attorneys, they'll have a 50-page intake of every question that they go through. And I go, that means you really don't know what you're doing.
It's a lot.
Yeah, because you're going through every possible little scenario. And a good estate planning attorney knows, I don't need to ask these 30. I have to ask these 20 questions. But the other 30 aren't necessary for this person. And because you just overwhelm someone with question after question. And then they don't want to do anything because they're like, oh, there's 10,000 different things. It's like, no, it's your job as a professional to know what is important and what is not important. And then identify those things and then help the client with the question, be able to answer the questions as easily as possible. And then let them move on with their life. But now they know, hey, this is what I want to happen in the end.
Okay, so I know that everyone needs their POAs, their directives done for healthcare reasons and for for incapacity reasons. But when do you need a will and when do you need a trust?
So,
What's the difference?
so the difference between a will and a trust is very simple. They're not the same thing. A will is a document that tells us two things: where your property is going and who's going to be in charge. Okay? And now it's has a lot of other things in there, but that's the basics of it. Just tells us those two things. Trusts are anytime you bifurcate the legal interest from the equitable interest in property, meaning you give somebody else management over property for another person. And because you do that, by putting that together, you're able to do things like avoid probate, because while you may pass away, you've said, here's who would be in charge legally to handle this. And since the property's not in your name, it's in the trust name, the trust doesn't die. It just transfers the assets to the next person for the benefit of the other people. But whenever you're dividing those interests, but there's thousands of reasons why you do that. It could be you have things that are required by law, like a qualified income trust. If you're trying to qualify for Medicaid and your income's too high, you need a qualified income trust. You could have tax reasons why you're doing non-grantor trusts that we talked about earlier today to save on taxes. Then you have other reasons where it's just as simple as I don't want my son's or my daughter's son to inherit the property because I think if she died, he would run off and remarry and give everything to a new wife. All those there's thousands of reasons I could list off, and there's thousands of different types of trusts. But that's why you sit down with the professionals. They guide you through that to explain all those scenarios and figure out which one actually applies to your family.
You mentioned probate. What is probate?
Probate means to prove. And what you're doing is proving who's in charge, and number two, who are the heirs to the property, who gets it. That's really all probate is. And so the hard thing for people to understand is wills have to go through probate. And no matter how many times I say that, they're like, then why do you do them? Well, it's because it makes it very easy for the judge to know the answer to those two questions. If you don't do one, then the judge has to look at the law, get all the information about your family, and determine what those two things are going to be for you. So that costs a lot more money and it makes it a lot more difficult. So there's not just one type of probate. There are 6 different types. In Texas, we have 6 different types of probate. They all accomplish the same goal, but very different based upon what assets are in what assets you have, what needs to be figured out, how we're going to handle all that.
So do I automatically get a trust whenever I set up a will, or do I automatically get a will whenever I set up a trust? Or is there a chance where I just set up a trust and not a will?
You can do that.
Can you put in your trust that these are my heirs, so you don't have to, you can just use that document to prove?
You could be very bad estate planning. The reason why is in order for assets to go according to the trust has to own them. Well, if you die and you never put an asset into the trust, well, the trust doesn't own it.
Then you have to go to...
Then you have to go through probate. But if you didn't do what we call a pour-over will, pours everything over to trust, it isn't going to go to the trust. It's going to go according to state law. So we always do a will when we have a trust, and that will is called a pour-over will, and it just says everything goes to the trust. And you do that. It's a backup document because people sometimes screw up. Now, are there situations? Yes. You can give someone a power of attorney to create a trust for you, and I've had a lot of people that had a power of attorney for their dad. He never did any estate planning other than he created a POA, and they're creating a trust for him, but they can't create a will because wills have to be signed by the testator. So we do that every once in a while, but that's because we have no other choice.
Last resort. In the world of LegalZoom and DIY, how would you convince people that they can't just do their trust. They can't just DIY their trust and write and say that, oh, I have a will
Oh, you
and no
can't.
trust.
But the thing is, you can.
You can, but what are the repercussions
It's
of
very simple.
doing it yourself?
It's when you go to an attorney, you aren't paying just for the drafting of the documents and the expertise. Those are two things that you're getting. You're getting someone to tell you what you sift through everything and tell you what you should be doing. Because sometimes you don't need a trust.
Yes.
You just need you need to do the simplest thing possible. And so, if you just went to LegalZoom, so you're not one. You get an expert that can actually tell you. Two, okay, you get the documents. You don't have to draft them. So if you make a mistake, you know that the attorney knows what they're doing. But the third, and the most important of why you go to an attorney, he's your insurance policy. At the end of the day, all those documents are a piece of paper. They mean absolutely nothing when you're gone if there's not backed up by something. And we challenge LegalZoom, whatever document you go online and create all the time, because we know that the person sat at a computer, typed up this stuff themselves, and we don't even know if they did it. We don't know if one of the siblings sat there and typed it up and put it all in there and then hauled down to sign documents from some notary. So it's so easy to go after that versus you go out and you get an attorney and then your siblings or somebody or someone wants to fight it. And that attorney has to come testify. I've had to come testify. And we always win. Because I sit there and I go, I asked all the questions that were required by law. I went through everything. I am never going to be part of creating something that I think is wrong for somebody because I don't want to be hauled into court and waste a week of my life for a few $100s so I could do someone's estate plan. I vet people because I'm putting my name on it. It's an insurance policy. I look really bad to the local probate judge if I draft documents that look shady. And so when you go to an attorney, it adds so much validity to it that it makes it actually worthwhile. And then also there's a lot of things written into the law that say if these documents are signed in an attorney's office, they get extra validity to them because we know an attorney has reviewed it, like power of attorneys is an example. So it's not necessarily, you can't go online and do it yourself.
You can.
You can.
Everything now is online.
You can do your own plumbing in your house too. Just when it all blows up on you, from whatever reason, you don't have anybody to go after. You have no policy to go after. And, I've made mistakes before. And guess what? Came out of my pocket. I had to go fix them. I created a trust once, did a deed. The deed had the wrong property description on it. Person passed away. I had to pay for the probate.
Oh.
Yeah. I had to go through the whole thing and go do the whole thing. And so, because I screwed up. And so, they ended up having to go through probate. And then there was one other case. The only time I actually had to pay another attorney to do something was because it was in another state and it was a deed once again. And it was done incorrectly. It caused a bunch of problems. And so I had to pay an attorney in Oklahoma to go fix it. And so those situations do arise, and I'm there and I have to cover it. So I don't understand why anyone would go online and just do it themselves.
Some people think they're saving money. It's true.
Yeah, and my experience has been people do it wrong more than they do it right. So you actually make it worse versus having nothing.
Yeah.
Because if you have nothing, the worst are the smarter the person is, the worse it is. The worse they do when they create the stuff because they get very creative in the document.
And they think they can just do whatever they want.
Yeah, and they don't understand the difference between things like community property, separate property, who's, what's actually going through probate, things like that.
Yeah. So now the last thing I think is what's stopping people from doing their estate plan is the cost. You know how they think it's too expensive. Why do I have to worry about it? They can just pay for it if they want to get my property when I pass. Things like that.
Yeah, it's really if you take it in the context, tell people all the time. Think of it like this. How much do you pay for homeowners insurance every month? Most people, somewhere between $200 to $600 a month. So your estate planning is going to be cheaper over a 1-year period than paying your homeowner's insurance. But your homeowner insurance is just insuring your house. Paying an estate plan attorney is insuring your whole estate, that it actually goes according to what you want. And you only have to pay one fee, and it's usually done. Mm-hmm. And so I tell you now, of course, the more complex, the more stuff you have, of course, that's not going to be true because you're going to have to come back because things change. But most people do it one time. And the cost comparatively to the other insurance that you get on things, significantly less. Just because you pay it up front one time, it feels like it's more. But usually most people that I'm meeting, it's not even close to what they spend on their homeowners insurance over a 2-year period of time.
And that's it. I'm going to stop because we don't want it to be too long. But Taylor, where can we find this book?
Online. And
we will be linking.
It's on Audibles too.
And it's on Audibles too. And we will be putting the link below for this Amazon. You can purchase Amazon. Don't forget, guys, and give ratings whenever you do. I'm sure you're going to like it. It's going to be so helpful. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you
for your time. Bye, guys.